Now, it wasn't long ago when we as Americans cherished the truth instead of demonizing it. And for those unfamiliar with the quote I just used, it's actually my own rebellious version of a quote from the author George Orwell, who wrote the book 1984, a nightmarish vision that has pretty much come true, ladies and gentlemen. Visions of constant government surveillance, the dismantling of our supreme law of the land, the Constitution, in particular the Fourth Amendment. All the while, we have been warned by books such as Orwell's, but like Ray Bradbury's novel, the citizenry just carries on and pays no mind to this intrusion with their proverbial seashells in their ears. In reality, it would be iPhones nowadays, right? But why, ladies and gentlemen, why? How could it be that the U.S. spies on its citizens more than its own enemies, and the public just lets it all go in one ear and out the other? I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I care, and my guest on today's show cares as well. We can see now that the message is beginning to resonate more and more with the masses, slowly but surely, as we have seen an increase in sales for the book 1984 on Amazon.com as of late. Now, joining me today is an award-winning reporter and former Fox News 19 Cincinnati correspondent, host and producer of the hard-hitting news series Reality Check, who is now launching his own Truth in Media project. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome award-winning reporter Ben Swann to our program. Hello, Ben. Thank you for joining us today.
Bruce, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on, Ben. Now, I mentioned George Orwell's book, 1984's increasing book sales. Now, we can see that the citizenry is starting to feel the nostalgia, so to say, of this nightmarish reality that's come to life where the government's eye is always upon you. What are your thoughts on 1984's increased popularity as of late?
Well, I think there's a couple things you can take away from it. First of all, you can keep in mind that you have, as you said, more and more people who are beginning to realize that this idea of a totalitarian state, certainly of a police state, is becoming more and more of a reality today. But the bigger question is, do you just accept that as your fate, or do you do something about it? The fact is, we are set up as a constitutional republic, right, in which the people of this country have the ability, under rule of law, to ensure that that kind of Orwellian future does not become our present or our future. And so, we have the ability, we have the right, we have the power to keep that from happening, but apathy will not intervene. And so you have to be willing to get up and do something about what you see going on around you.
Absolutely. Could have said it better myself. Now, Ben, let's get into the interview here. You were one of the first journalists ever to confront Barack Obama regarding his kill list. This was during the heart of Obama's re-election campaign. Now, please inform our listening audience about that confrontation where the president neither confirmed nor denied the existence of this list, but we know for a fact that he has killed U.S. citizens abroad without due process, such as Anwar al-Awlaki, his 17-year-old son, and even his son's friend via drone strikes in Yemen back in September of 2010. Now, it has been reported that al-Awlaki dined with military brass at the Pentagon months after 9/11. Now, that being said, Ben, tell us about your courageous and informative interview with Barack Obama.
Well, there's quite the setup there. I don't think it was a courageous interview. I think it was an intellectually honest interview,
right,
because I was willing to ask these questions. But quite frankly, the issues at their core are very important issues. And it's not about a Democrat versus Republican issue, but left versus right issue. It's a question of a liberty versus tyranny issue. And the fact is, we have a Fourth Amendment, we have a Fifth Amendment, we have due process built into our Constitution for a reason. Our founders and framers did not trust the government of this nation to have unchecked power. It's clear in every design of our republic, of our way of life. It's all set up to make sure that there are safeguards so that one branch of government or one individual or one administration does not have total power. And yet when you relinquish the authority to one man in this case, the executive of the country, the president, to be able to decide whether or not people suspected, not even with evidence or proof against them, simply suspected of terrorism, to be able to kill even citizens without due process, endangers every American's life. Look, there are a lot of people, Bruce, who will sit back and they'll say, look, this guy was a terrorist, he was a bad guy, there had to be evidence, there had to be proof. I've even had people say to me, imagine if the president couldn't even tell us, all the details of it. Imagine how bad it must have been.
Right.
Well, if he couldn't tell us the details, maybe it wasn't bad at all. Maybe there wasn't any evidence. Maybe there was tremendous evidence. But there is a system set up, a rule of law system designed to ensure that we don't have unilateral decisions made over life and death. And when you take a term like terrorist, which is a very ambiguous term, take that term, you can really apply it to anything. So, is someone who believes in the Constitution deemed an enemy of the state or a terrorist? Is that the situation? So, I think it's easy for people when the guy's in Yemen to say, well, that was an easy one. What about if the person's in Seattle? What about if the person is in L.A., where you guys are?
Right.
And the government simply decides that this person is a threat to the country and has no burden of proof in a court of law. That is why it was so important to talk to them about this kill list.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a supporter of al-Awlaki. He was as dirty as can be, but the fact of the matter is, Ben, I mean, he's American just like us, so if they infringe upon his rights, what's to stop them from infringing upon ours?
Well, that's exactly right. And again, what we know about al-Awlaki is very little, because even if a judge had ordered for Homeland Security to hand over any evidence they had on al-Awlaki so that we would know, as you said, how dirty he was, that a judge couldn't even have gotten that information because it's all sealed up and classified under national security. So one of the problems here is that we have to trust that what we're being told about someone's guilt or the danger of that person to society as a whole or at large. We have to trust that information is true. And that's exactly the problem. Our founders and framers, again, it wasn't a Democrat issue, it wasn't a President Obama issue or a President Bush issue. The founders and framers believed that the evidence of proof had to be established as part of due process. And look, there is even a technical term. If you believe that al-Awlaki as a citizen really was an enemy of the state, then charge him with treason. Right. But there's a reason he wasn't charged with treason against the United States. And the reason for that is because the legal standard for treason requires that at least 2 or 3 witnesses in an open court of law have to be able to provide evidence or testimony. No evidence was ever shown to the public about any guilt of this man. One other thing on this. Al-Awlaki was accused of having influenced, notice that word, of having influenced the underwear bomber, the Times Square bomber, and Major Nidal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter.
Right.
Influencing those people by writing things on the internet. Having said that, the actual Fort Hood shooter who actually shot people and actually killed them stands trial. But the person who influenced him was too dangerous and couldn't and had to be killed with drone strike. There's something wrong with the system that says this guy who's influencing people doesn't get a trial, but this guy who actually pulled the trigger does get one. It's just a system that doesn't work under rule of law.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Ben, you began your career, moving forward here, you began your career covering much of the violence that has engulfed Mexico on the Mexico and Texas border for 11 years over at KFOX TV El Paso. What are your thoughts on notorious drug lords' statements, such as Joaquin El Chapo Guzman thanking both the Obama administration, Bush and Reagan administrations, for their criminal empires, and also the fact that top Mexican drug traffickers such as Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, that's a lot of names, right, are linked to the FBI, DEA, and CIA. I mean, this guy is known for purchasing a CIA torture plane that crashed with 4 tons of cocaine on board. It has become obvious that the government is involved in drug trafficking. Your thoughts?
Well, what I can speak to on that is during the reporting that we were doing, it was very clear to us over the course of several years of covering the story that, quite frankly, The problem in Mexico with the drug war was that it was not actually legitimately drug cartels fighting each other. It was an attempt by government in Mexico and certainly the Mexican military, to condense and create one super cartel to wipe out all the others. That's what was really happening in Mexico. So you heard about all these cartels fighting each other, and it really wasn't accurate to say they were truly fighting each other for territory. What was happening was Chapo Guzman's Sinaloa cartel was attempting to take out all the other cartels. And what's important about that is every place where Guzman's Sinaloa cartel would show up in a different city. So take, for instance, Ciudad Juarez, which is right across the river from El Paso, Texas, and the largest border city in Mexico. When you have the Sinaloa cartel move in to try to take over that particular territory, all of a sudden you would also get with it Mexican military would show up and begin trying to crack down. And what we found, not only from witnesses, but talking to people from various walks of life in Mexico, people who were witnessing what was going on, and this became just a fact, not just in Juarez, but all across Mexico. Every place where the military went, they would only fight one side. They would only take out the rival cartels and never Sinaloa. And so it became very clear that there was some kind of connection between the Sinaloa cartel and the Mexican military in terms of consolidating power and creating the one super cartel. That's where the situation was. Then, of course, you have Fast and Furious, and we find out that our government is actually sending all these guns into Mexico, allowing them to be taken across the river, and they end up in the hands of cartels. So it's a very complicated situation, a lot of layers to it, and it's a very serious one. But it's something that is important for people when you realize that 70% of all law enforcement money on local levels goes toward fighting drugs. 70% of it does. And yet our government and the Mexican government and all these governments that talk all the time about the importance of fighting this war are heavily involved in, continuing the violence associated with it. So it's important for people to understand that when these same lawmakers are the ones making drug policy in this country. Right.
And the citizenry of Mexico is starting to stand up against these drug traffickers, these narcos.
I think there's a need, and I've actually been talking to a couple people about this, a need for a strong push for individual liberty rights in Mexico, which really don't exist right now. The state is incredibly powerful there, and there's a growing movement. We're actually going to get involved with helping that movement to grow. But it needs to happen. The power has to be returned to the people of Mexico, who are really the ones who suffer at the hands of corrupt politicians and these large organized crime groups that are running the nation. So I'd love to see that happen. It's going to be a long road for Mexico, but I think that they could certainly, you're going to see kind of a young movement that's about to break forward there.
Absolutely. Now, Ben, I have to say, I basically woke up at age 9. I'm a young man, 28 years old right now, and I woke up while visiting my grandmother's house in Jalisco, Mexico, which is where my family's from. I witnessed the murder, man, on TV, the murder of the Mexican president-elect Luis Donaldo Colosio at 9 years old on television back in 1994. Now that, to Mexico, was the equivalent of the Kennedy assassination. And around that time, 1994, you were graduating from Brigham Young University. Now, tell us, what are some of your most favorite subjects to study, and what inspired you to be a reporter, man?
Well, a couple of things on that. When I went to BYU, I actually was not studying journalism and had no interest in broadcast or any of that. I didn't even know about it. That was not even sort of on my radar. So my degree is actually a Bachelor of Liberal Arts. My master's is in history from Cal State, Dominguez Hills. And so, that was never kind of my motivation, was to get involved in journalism on any level. I was always fascinated, though, by history, and specifically kind of the cycles historically that we see in our nation and we see worldwide. There are these cycles that we can constantly go through. And it's pretty simple. And it's always man attempting to rule other men. And when I say men, obviously, I mean populations. So you've got people attempting to rule populations. And it's been that way really since the dawn of time, and it just comes around in cycles again. The positive part of that is every few generations there comes an opportunity for people to break free of that. Maybe the longest running experiment in world history is this one that we're going through in America right now.
Right.
But that's starting to slip away a little bit. Well, not even a little bit, a lot of it. And we're giving that up because we've forgotten what it means. And more importantly, we've forgotten what it means to not be free, as opposed to what it is to be free. So I think for me personally, I was always interested in history, but I got into this business to be, quite frank with you, because I needed a job. I became a news photographer because I had 3 brothers who were news photographers. I ended up becoming a reporter on camera because my wife and I got married and we had 2 little girls, and I needed to make more money. So, it just worked out that I was very fortunate, very blessed to be given an opportunity to have a platform to talk about some of these issues that I've been very passionate about.
Right. And happy Father's Day to you, Ben, by the way.
Thank you, and to you as well.
Thank you. That's what gives us our passion, right? Just knowing that we have our
Absolutely,
princesses.
it does. Absolutely.
Now, Ben, tell us about your experience as a panel member for the Third Party Candidates Forum last year.
Well, I was never actually a panel member for that. I was supposed to be, and it's the last minute some things changed, so I wasn't able to be. I was in attendance. I did go, and I sat in the audience and was able to listen in. And the interesting thing about that third-party debate is that you had some pretty interesting people there, and some of the ideas were kind of out there and certainly not mainstream ideas. And some of the candidates were kind of out there. The positive thing about that, if you didn't have a two-party system, as we've now established, certainly in the debates, I think is that you would create far more diversity. Just taking, even just Gary Johnson by himself as the Libertarian candidate, and you had put him into the debates with President Obama and Governor Mitt Romney, if you had put him into those debates, it would have forced some interesting conversations about U.S. policy, about drug policy, about interventionism, about foreign wars, about the economy, about budgets and deficit, conversations that were not had during the debate. Instead, the debates really focused on, kind of this piddly fighting back and forth because they were so similar on so many things that there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. So the thing about those debates, as I sat there with my wife, we would listen, and there were moments when I would say, see, that's something that you're never going to hear in a formal presidential debate. Certainly not one put on by the Commission for Presidential Debates.
Absolutely. I mean, we've gone beyond the left-right paradigm, as you've stated many times. Now, Ben, the Federal Reserve, as you know, is the central bank of the world, and fractional reserve lending must be stopped, outlawed, banned, abolished, you name it. Now, I know you agree with me when I say that our country must issue non-debt-based currencies such as Abe Lincoln's greenback. But now I know Lincoln, had arrested thousands for disagreeing with him at one point and even instituted martial law. But, I think he and Andrew Jackson had the right idea when it came to banking reform. I know you're a strong advocate for ending the Fed on your show, Reality Check. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the Federal Reserve Bank is not federal and has nothing in reserve, so that's the first problem with it, or the first two problems with it. It's a system that was not designed with the interest of the public in mind, and that's what's important for people to understand. The Federal Reserve System was America's third attempt at a national bank. The first two failed. And this third one was dreamed up. Some of your listeners may not know the place Jekyll Island. There's a great book. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it documents the history behind the Federal Reserve Bank and where it came from. The reason it's important for folks to read that is to get an understanding that, because especially in our generation today, we just assume that a Federal Reserve Bank has been around since the founding. That's what was set up. It's part of our government. It's not. It's a private entity, a private banking entity that determines interest rates. It determines how much money is flowing into the system, how much money is printed. It can artificially hold interest rates down. It can artificially increase those rates whenever it desires. It has no specific accountability to the American taxpayer. It has no accountability to Congress. It has no accountability to the president. And that's very important for people to understand because it was created by banking families who wanted to manipulate the system. And that's what has happened. This isn't, way out there conspiracy stuff. It's actually very well documented. All you have to do is go and check out a couple books about it, and it's very clear how the system was set up, and even how it still runs today, and how the Federal Reserve, if you actually look at it, is designed. It is not respondent to the people, and yet it has complete authority over the value of your money. You're telling me that system should not be accountable to the people?
It's ridiculous. I mean, you have these central banks that compound interest out of money they create out of thin air, and then behind doors they coerce these governments for centuries, for over 200 years. Basically, the people have no say. I mean, the government's going to do what the guys with the deep pockets tell them, right, Ben?
Well, absolutely, they will. And the fact is that these entities, again, are allowed to hold down interest rates, and they're allowed to print all this money. So, for instance, some of your listeners may or may not be familiar with the term quantitative easing.
Right.
So, since 2008, we've had, in order to quote-unquote save the financial markets, we've had something called quantitative easing. You can just Google search that term, and what you're going to find is there have been 3 rounds so far, and a 4th round that's about to begin again, of what's called quantitative easing. What that essentially means is that the Federal Reserve Bank is saying they are going to print money to buy up bad, toxic assets. Okay? So on kind of the face value of it, what you're going to hear is that quantitative easing is designed in order to protect the market from bad mortgages that had flooded the system. And so the Federal Reserve is going to buy it up and protect everyone. What actually happened was the Federal Reserve Bank went out, printed a whole bunch of money, and flooded it into banks to cover the cost. However, the people who were underwater on their mortgages, the people who were losing money because their value of their house was down, the people who had their homes being taken away because they were being foreclosed on, those people did not see any of that money. There was no protection for those people through quantitative easing. Okay? So there have been now 3 rounds of this. The second round of it went to foreign banks. The first one went to American banks. The second one went to foreign banks. Over $1 billion that was flooded into foreign banks to cover their losses. Again, nothing went to the American people. Now we're in a setup right now under QE3, or the third round of quantitative easing. The way it works is the Federal Reserve Bank is printing between 40 and 70 billion with a B, 40 to 70 billion dollars worth of American currency every single month to continue to buy up mortgage-backed securities. It's a horrible system. And again, it does nothing for the people. They have no charter designed to protect the people. It has nothing to do with the individual taxpayer. So when you sit back at home and you think to yourself, well, the government's taking care of it, then Bernanke's taking care of it, the Federal Reserve's taking care of us, they're not taking care of you. They're not here for you. They're here for themselves because they're a private, money-making, money-generating entity.
Wow. Truly unbelievable. I mean, you couldn't have put it better. You couldn't have said it better. I mean, now, Ben, going back to the drug war, we see the continuation of Operation Black Eagle. I mean, the real name for the Iran-Contra, this drug and gun-running operation that continues today. I mean, it took place in Benghazi and continues on the U.S.-Mexico border, with this administration deliberately involved in the murders of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry via Operation Fast and Furious, and of course Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Dorothy, and Ambassador Stevens. Now, I have stated that their families must have justice though the heavens fall. Ben, give us your take on Benghazi Gate. Well,
the facts, I think, are pretty simple on Benghazi, and there's a lot of discussion about what it was really about and how the administration was connected to it. The bottom line is there's been a lot of reporting, and I have not done this reporting independently, so I'm referring to reporting by others here. Okay. There's been a lot of reporting that Chris Stevens was connected to gun running that was actually designed to transfer arms to the Syrian rebels, which may or may not be true, but there's been a lot of reporting on that. Regardless of whether or not that is fully accurate, the fact is there is a very simple reality to what happened in Benghazi. And that is that the United States continues a policy. Did it in Libya. We're doing it again in Syria. We are essentially taking American money. We are funneling it to radical Islamic groups like Al-Qaeda. We are giving them weapons and we're giving them cash. They are overthrowing these different governments that in many cases are secular governments and establishing radical Islamic Muslim governments, which, by the way, are extremely violent toward other Muslims.
Right.
You know, it's not a situation where you have, it's Muslims against everyone else, or, this group of Muslims versus the Christians and the Jews. The fact is these Al-Qaeda groups are incredibly violent towards even their own other Muslims. And so what we're seeing in Syria, for instance, right now, and a lot of people may not realize this, Syria, Bruce, this is important, is the only single country in the Middle East under Assad, is the only country in the Middle East where Christians, Jews, Muslims, being Sunni and Shia Muslims, and Alawites all live in peace.
Right.
It is the only single place in the Middle East where that's happening. What's happening with this Syrian civil war is that Al-Qaeda fighters from other countries, it's not Syrians who are involved in this, from other countries are coming into Syria to overthrow the government there. And if you just go on YouTube, they're putting videos up all the time. There's videos with kids singing songs about how once they're in, they're going to kill every Muslim who does not stand with them. They're going to cut off the heads of Alawites. They're going to cut off the heads of Christians and Jews.
Wow.
And so the story here is it happened in Libya. It happens in Syria. It happens all over the world. We install governments, and we then watch them fall apart and install even more radicalized governments who in turn are now the quote-unquote enemy that we have to fight against. We created the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. That's a very well-known piece of American history, and yet we don't seem to learn from it. We created the Mujahideen in order to fight the Soviets. We funded bin Laden in order to fight the Soviets. Bin Laden turns on us, and now we've got to fight Al-Qaeda. But then at the same time, not only are we fighting Al-Qaeda, we're also attempting to, set up Al-Qaeda as the government in Syria. It just doesn't make any sense to a rational person.
Right. I mean, the Mujahideen was funded, I believe, 6 months before the Russian Inquisition came into Pakistan, right?
That's right. That's correct.
Right.
And it's as I said, this is something that we continue to do. So you have someone like Senator John McCain, for instance, who just spent Memorial Day over in Syria meeting with the leaders of the FSA, the Free Syrian Army.
Wow.
This is the same senator who created the indefinite detention clause in the National Defense Authorization Act that says if, as an American citizen, you do anything that funds or supports Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or any associated force, you can be held indefinitely without trial. And yet he wants us to provide heavy arms and a no-fly zone to the quote-unquote rebels in Syria, who we know are actually a group called Al-Nusra Front. Wow. The Al-Nusra Front in December of 2012 was officially designated a terror organization by our own government. And yet they are the largest, best funded opposition to Assad in Syria. Does that make any sense at all, that we would be funding those groups and then at the same time, while we're funding them, we're fighting them? It makes no sense at all, unless you realize that the whole thing is really just set up in order to, again, control population.
Right. It's McCarthyism all over again. I mean, America needs its boogeyman to go after for us to throw our liberties up in the air and cry for the government to save us, right, Ben?
Well, that's what it is. It's always about, you've got to trust government to save us, government to protect us, government to look out for us. And the reality is that the people in this nation are the ones who have to restore order, and they have to restore common sense. It's not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. The grassroots, the people in this country, are the ones who have the ability to really make changes.
Right.
But unless they stand up and do something about the systems that are in place right now, we're going to find ourselves in a really bad spot where you no longer have the right to make those changes.
Right, and we see it now. We were talking about 1984 earlier. I mean, we're living in this world. They see everything we do. We could see that with whistleblower Edward Snowden. I mean, he's running for his life. We don't know if he's in Hong Kong. We know that he's not allowed to fly. What's your take on Operation Prism and this whistleblower Edward Snowden?
Well, a couple things on that. I have a new full disclosure that I'm putting out coming up here in the end of the week where we're going to talk about this. But the reality is, the question the media is asking about Snowden is the wrong question. The question they keep asking, is he a hero or is he a criminal? Right. And that's not the question. The question is Snowden right about what he said? Because if he's right, then the next question should be not, okay, so being right, is he a criminal or is he a hero? No. The next question is, was our government committing a crime against its own people? Because that's the definition of a whistleblower. A whistleblower is only defined as such if they reveal when a government or an agency of the government is acting illegally or criminally against its own people. And so the big question is, did Snowden reveal something that the United States was doing that was more than unethical? Something that was actually criminal? That's the question. And what we're going to reveal this week in the work that we've been doing and trying to dig up is that, in fact, yes, what the NSA was doing, even under the very, very overreaching, very broad steps of the Patriot Act and what was laid out there, which a lot of folks will argue is completely unconstitutional to begin with, even beyond that, even under the overreach of the Patriot Act, it was still, in fact, illegal what the NSA was doing, and we're going to break down exactly why that is.
Absolutely. I even heard Snowden say in one of his remarks that he could even tap the president's phone if he wanted. Did you hear about that?
I haven't heard that. It wouldn't surprise me, though. And I think it's funny that the response to him has been the FBI says that they're going to find him, they're going to get him. There's all this concern he needs to be tried for treason. It's so interesting to me that on Capitol Hill, Republicans can yell and shout and scream about this IRS scandal and the targeting of conservative groups, which, by the way, they should be yelling about because it's completely beyond reason that the IRS would target any political group. Right. And yet what the NSA is doing to pretty much every American, we're talking about millions upon millions of wireless users, we're talking about internet users, we're talking about folks who use Google and Microsoft and Yahoo.
Right.
What our own NSA was doing is far more egregious in terms of an overreach of government and illegal activity than what the IRS was doing. And yet Republicans want to be okay with this other one because it's like, we got to be able to know who's bad and who's a terrorist and who's not. There's a huge problem here in terms of, what the role of government really is supposed to be. And that's why I have a phrase I use a lot, and some of you folks might have heard it, but we like to say liberty is rising. And that's why I believe liberty is rising in this country. But unfortunately, Bruce, I feel like liberty has a narrow window in which to really rise in this country. And if we miss our opportunity, we're going to miss it for a couple generations here.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to talk about another secretive cabal that has been going on as of late. A lot of people probably are new to this. Of course, you and I have heard of the Bilderberg Group and the fact that they meet in secret yearly and discuss foreign policy really without any public scrutiny. I mean, this is the military-industrial complex leaders, central banking leaders, you name it. They meet there and they discuss foreign issues in private. I mean, how can this be? How can we let these people get away with this and not arrest them for treason?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, obviously, it's only illegal if the folks who are there are meeting in secret, with elected officials. Mm-hmm. And so I know there's a lot of evidence going both ways and a lot of discussion on this. But where people should be outraged, regardless of the particulars of each circumstance, they should be outraged at the idea that government and business have such collusion in this country and worldwide that
there are very few at the top who are making an awful lot of decisions for the masses. And that's a problem. That's the biggest problem. You're handing over way too much control over populations to very few people. And so, again, I think it goes back to this idea that, capitalism, true free markets, which this country really was founded on, those work great. But what we have in this country today is not capitalism. We have crony capitalism. We have business and government working together in collusion to control the population and to make profit in the quest for money and power. And so it's a huge problem. And it's funny even saying this stuff, Bruce, because, I realize that even as I say it, there may be people who are listening who are saying, oh, my gosh, this guy, everything's a conspiracy, everything is this group's working to get you, and these guys are trying to get you, and the government's trying to do this. Anything that I'm saying today, for your listeners, if you doubt any of it, this information is so readily available out there. Right. And historically, it's so clearly out there. But, media spends so much time talking about Kanye and Kim Kardashian's baby. They don't have time to get into any of this stuff. Ben, just a little bit of legwork, a little bit of research, and your listeners are going to find out that this stuff, it's pretty out there in terms of easy to find information.
Right. And you mentioned Kanye and Kim. I mean, to me, it's amazing that our society knows these people like in the snap of a finger, but they don't know that their own government was found guilty in the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, that baffles me.
Yeah, it's incredible, and one of the problems is a very successful attempt at smearing anyone who talks about these things as being, one, a conspiracy theorist,
right,
or two, as being the new term that we like, which is truther. Gotta love that truther term. No. It's basically the smear that says anyone who does not believe an official story, then clearly that person's a truther. And it's funny because as a journalist, I've been called a truther journalist on several issues. The fact is, that's what every journalist should be. You should be a truther in that you should be seeking truth, not seeking fame and not seeking press releases. You should be seeking the truth of whatever's happening, regardless of party or politics.
Absolutely. And an investigative journalist questions everything he can get his hands on. Now, Ben, before we wrap up here, many have stated that Barack Obama is a creation of the intelligence world, and his draconian laws would make him ineligible for the presidency today because he would have a criminal record due to his admission of using both marijuana, cocaine. Now, I believe private investigators in Ohio and a retired U.S. Air Force colonel managed to obtain Obama's Social Security number, and ironically, it didn't even pass E-Verify. Now, Ben, my question to you is, who is this man, and do you think it's possible that this whole thing could just be some type of political tactic by the White House to further distract the citizenry?
Yeah, I would say, on that note, and I'm glad we're finishing with that because I think it's an important thing. A lot of folks have talked about the ineligibility of the president, his birth certificate, his Social Security number. There's all this debate about him. But the fact is this, that President Barack Obama is the president of the United States. Right. But the problems the country faces are not Barack Obama problems. And anyone who wants to believe that, and there's a lot of Republicans and a lot of conservatives who would say, you're absolutely wrong. He is the problem with the country. He's not the problem with the country. So President Obama or President Hillary Clinton or President Mitt Romney or President John McCain would have all led to the same problems that our country's facing. And those problems are fundamental beliefs that our Bill of Rights and our Constitution and rule of law and freedom for the individual does not exist anymore. And that everything has to be kind of pushed into this greater good system of a nanny-state. It's unfair, and it's illegal in many cases, but that's the problem. So if you reach down and you were able to pluck President Obama out of his spot somehow and replace him with Joe Biden, do you really believe that the country is going to be better off? If you could pluck Joe Biden out of that spot and now replace him with John McCain, do you really believe the country is going to be better off?
Absolutely.
And so that's the fundamental question of our time. It's not a problem of the Democratic Party. the Republican Party. It's a problem that both parties have become, two wings of the same bird, which ultimately believes that government is the answer to the problems we face today. There are many of us who believe that's not true, that the individual in this country is the answer, and that great ideas and great thoughts and great concepts come from the people. We're doing this thing called the Truth in Media Project right now, right. And we're doing it through Kickstarter, right? We're launching this thing. It launched last week, and I want to encourage your listeners, go check it out on Kickstarter.com, Truth in Media Project. And we're trying to create a 3-level platform, including 100 high-quality videos that explain to people news of the day and what's happening in context, but also that work with student groups and journalism groups, that work with the Tea Party and the best anger that came out of that, the Occupy movement, the best anger out of that, giving it a voice, and really fighting to say that the individual is the answer, and that restoring authority to the people and protecting the rights of people, regardless of whether they're on the left or on the right. Restoring and protecting their rights is what we need in this nation. And I want to encourage your listeners, I talked about this at the beginning, apathy isn't going to fix anything. So plucking one president out isn't going to fix anything. What fixes things is when people get radically involved in a cause that says we're going to fix the system that's been built. It's a pretty darn good system, Bruce. This American constitutional rule of law republic is an awfully good system, but it's just not working right now because we're not working it. And I want to encourage people to get involved. Do it in a responsible way, in a smart way. Don't be violent. Don't go out and trash things. Don't start fires and riots and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't fix things. There's a way to fix things in this country, and we do it through education, and we do it through engagement, and we do it through activism. And I believe that is the answer to what we're facing today.